There is a desert in southern Morocco, far from the cities and paved roads. It stretches for hundreds of kilometers, a quiet ocean of gold. The wind moves across the dunes like waves across water, shaping and reshaping them over time. Here, under the burning sun, time slows down. The sand is always shifting, yet the landscape seems unchanged. In a village called Tagna, on the edge of this desert, a man named Hamid has lived his whole life. He is a desert guide, tall, weathered, with eyes that squint even when there is no sun. He has led travelers across dunes for decades. He knows the stars by memory. He knows the taste of the wind. And he knows something else, something few outsiders believe. When the wind is right, he says, the desert sings. He doesn't mean wind whistling through rocks or dry air rushing over hills. He means a real sound, deep, low, like a distant drum or a cello played underground. It rises suddenly from nowhere. It fills the air, makes the skin vibrate, then disappears as quickly as it came. Sometimes it lasts for minutes, sometimes only seconds. But once you hear it, you never forget. Hamid first heard it when he was a boy. He had gone with his father to collect water from a spring beyond the dunes. They stopped to rest. Then, as the afternoon wind began to rise, it came, the hum. It made the ground feel alive. His father said nothing, just nodded and said, "It is the breath of the desert. Do not walk too fast when it sings." Over the years, Hamid heard the sound again and again, always in the same place, always when the wind was strong but steady. He told a few travelers. Most laughed. A few listened. Fewer believed. One visitor had brought a recorder once, but when the sound came, the machine failed. Now, years later, the singing desert has become more memory than mystery. Fewer travelers come. Hamid still walks the dunes. Sometimes he hears it, sometimes not. But he waits. And on one particular morning, just after sunrise, with the sky soft and the air cool, he hears it again. Faint at first, like a low note inside a cello. Then stronger, richer. The sand around him seems to shift in rhythm, though nothing moves. He closes his eyes. And far away, in a city filled with maps and research papers, a geologist named Claire Rousseau opens a letter. It is written in uneven English. It reads, "The sound has returned. You should come." Claire Rousseau had never forgotten the sound. She had first visited Morocco as a graduate student 12 years ago. At that time, her interest in geology was still young, fascinated more by questions than by answers. She had come with a team to study desert erosion and dune movement. But what stayed with her was not the shape of the sand. It was a story. She had met Hamid in Tagna. He had taken them across the dunes. On the third evening, as the sun dropped low and the wind began to rise, he stopped suddenly and told them to listen. At first, they heard nothing. Then it came, faint, strange, and deep. The air seemed to hold a single musical note. No instrument, no voice, just a vibration, smooth and long, like the hum of earth itself. Most of the students thought it was wind in the rocks. One joked that it was the desert snoring. But Claire felt something different. She didn't laugh. She had never heard anything like it. not in mountains, not in forests, not near glaciers. When she asked Hamid what it was, he only said, "We don't speak during the song." Claire had written a short note about it in her journal. She called it Phenomenon Unknown, Possible Acoustic Sand Behavior. She made a sketch of the dune's shape. Then life moved on. Now, 12 years later, she was no longer a student. She had become a respected geologist with a quiet office in Paris, a wall of dusty books, and a long list of published articles. But the mystery of the singing desert remained, unanswered, untested. When the letter arrived from Hamid, she didn't hesitate. She packed a small recorder, a portable vibration sensor, and a set of high-frequency microphones. She booked a flight to Casablanca, then a long drive south to Tacna. The journey took days, but the moment she stepped out of the car and smelled the warm, dry wind, she knew she was in the right place. Hamid met her with a wide smile and hands rough from wind and time. "It's good to see you," he said. "Do you still hear it often?" Claire asked. "Only when the desert wants to speak," he replied. That evening, they sat on the edge of the village and watched the dunes fade into darkness. The sand turned silver under the moon. Claire unpacked her equipment carefully, setting up the microphones and sensors. They faced the largest dune, tall and steep, its curves soft like fabric. "This one sings the loudest," Hamid said. Claire examined the sand. It was dry and fine, almost like flour. She ran it through her fingers. The grains shimmered in the moonlight, perfectly rounded. "It has to be the grains," she said softly. "Something about their size or shape." That night, the wind stayed quiet. The next morning, Claire climbed the dune alone. Each step was slow, the sand pulling at her boots. At the top, she paused. Below her, the desert stretched out, empty, endless, golden. She closed her eyes and listened. And then, nothing. Then, as if the desert had been waiting, a gust of wind rose, long, steady, soft, and the sound began. Not loud, not fast, but real, a low, clear hum. She knelt and turned on the recorder. The sensors blinked to life. For several seconds, the sound stayed. Then it faded, as if slipping back beneath the sand. Claire stood slowly. Her hands trembled. She had never heard anything like it, not in mountains, not in forests, not near glaciers. The next morning, the desert was calm. The sun rose early, washing the sand in soft amber light. Claire and Hamid loaded their supplies onto a small camel caravan. There would be no more drives from here, only walking. The singing dune lay deep inside the desert, past places where the wind had erased the paths. Their guide was a younger man named Idris, quiet but sure-footed. He knew the dunes like other people knew city streets. His eyes scanned the horizon without effort. He had also heard the sound. "My father said the desert sings when it remembers," he told Claire. She asked him what it remembered. He shrugged. "Maybe storms, maybe footsteps." They walked for hours. The landscape changed with every dune they crossed. Some were soft and golden. Others were high and sharp, with edges like waves frozen in place. The wind was low but steady, whispering against the surface. Claire paused often to test the sand. She carried a small hand lens and looked at the grains. In some places, the grains were fine and round. In others, they were more jagged. She made notes in her book. "Only certain dunes sing," she said aloud. Hamid nodded. "The old ones." By afternoon, they reached a wide, steep dune that curved like a bowl. Idris called it Al-Ghanima, the prize. This was the place. Claire set up her equipment again. Microphones, vibration sensors, a small speaker to play test sounds. She poured a little sand into a metal tray and tilted it back and forth. The grains moved together like tiny marbles. She closed her eyes and listened. Nothing. Then Idris walked slowly up the side of the dune. With each step, a sound began to rise, a soft groan like the start of thunder. It came from deep inside the dune, not from the surface. Claire turned on her recorder. The sound grew louder as Idris reached the top. Deep, clear, almost musical. Then, when he stopped, the sound faded and vanished. She was amazed. "It's not the wind alone," she said. "It's movement." Over the next hours, she and Idris took turns climbing the dune, sliding down its side, and testing different angles. Each time they moved across the surface in just the right way, the desert sang again. That evening, they gathered around a small fire. The stars were sharp in the sky. Claire listened as Hamid told more stories. "In the old days," he said, "the people believed the desert was alive. It could speak, but only in music." Were they afraid? No, not afraid, but respectful. They believed the sound was a sign. It came before great changes, storms, floods, even the birth of a child. Claire looked toward the dunes. "Do you believe that?" she asked. Hamid stirred the fire with a stick. "I believe the desert remembers things we do not," he said. That night, the wind picked up again. The sound returned, slow and low, rolling across the sand, like a song without words. Claire lay awake, listening. It was a sound she couldn't explain. Not yet. But it was real. It moved the air. It moved the heart. She wrote in her notebook, "Sound appears with steady slope, fine sand, and wind or motion. Frequency approximately 100 Hz. Behavior not fully understood. Something else is happening." The singing continued until just before dawn. Morning came with still air and sharp sunlight. The desert looked unchanged, but Claire now saw it differently. Every dune was a question, every curve a clue. She began collecting sand samples from different slopes of Al-Ghanima. She labeled each carefully, noting their location and texture. Then she laid them out in a metal tray and examined them under a portable microscope. Most of the grains were similar, small, round, polished by centuries of wind. But some, especially from the slopes that didn't sing, were rougher, irregular, sharp. "It's the shape," she said aloud. "The grains that are too rough get stuck. They don't flow." She poured a handful of the rounder grains onto a metal plate and tilted it. As the sand moved together, it made a faint whisper. Then, when she poured it faster, the whisper deepened. A low note, just audible, like a string being plucked. Hamid watched from a distance. "The song is in the slide," he said. Claire nodded. Friction, pressure, movement. The grains press and rub together. Maybe air vibrates between them. But even as she spoke, something felt missing. She had studied many materials that made noise, ice cracking, rocks grinding, but this was different. The sound of Al-Ghanima wasn't random. It had tone, depth, and sometimes even rhythm. It was not a simple noise. It felt designed. Idris returned from his walk with news. There's another dune, west, smaller. It also sings. They packed quickly and followed him through the dunes. After 2 hours, they reached a narrow slope shaded by a rocky cliff. It was smaller than Al Ghanima, but steeper. Idris ran up the side, and when he slid down, the dune responded, not with a hum, but with a vibration. A sound like a cello string trembling, short and strong. Claire repeated the test, this time placing vibration sensors along the slope. The pattern was clear. A buildup of energy, a sudden release, and then the sound. That evening, she reviewed the recordings and saw something strange. The dune's note didn't match the slope's shape or angle. 2 dunes with similar structure produced different tones. "It's not only the sand," she murmured. "It's the body of the dune, the way it holds and releases energy, like a giant speaker." The idea was not new. Some scientists had proposed it before, but no one had explained exactly why some dunes sang and others stayed silent. Theories mentioned dry sand, surface tension, or sound waves bouncing between layers. But Claire felt the answer was more complex. Something about scale and timing, about how billions of grains move together in harmony. As the wind picked up again that night, she sat alone on the edge of the smaller dune, her recorder running. The sound returned, low and even, like a song sung only once per day. A natural voice, slow and clear. Then, as if on cue, it stopped. Total silence. Claire held her breath. In the silence, she felt the surface of the sand grow still beneath her hand, but something deeper, beneath the surface, seemed alive. Not a creature, not a ghost, but a kind of memory. A shape held in tension, a moment between movement and stillness. She returned to camp in the dark and wrote just 5 words in her notebook. This sound is not random. The next morning, they received a call from a desert research center in California. "We heard you're studying singing dunes," the voice said. "You should come. We have one here too." Claire looked out at Al Ghanima. The dunes seemed to wait, silent once more. Then she replied, "I'm listening." Claire stood at the edge of the Kelso Dunes, in California's Mojave Desert. The sky above was wide and cloudless, the sand pale and dry, but the feeling was strangely familiar, just like Morocco. The same quiet, the same weight in the air. And, if the researchers here were right, the same hidden song. She was greeted by Dr. Anthony Delgado, a desert acoustics specialist. He had studied these dunes for years and had collected dozens of recordings. Yet, like Claire, he had no final answer. "They call it booming sand," he said as they climbed one of the larger dunes. "But the sound isn't a boom. It's more like a long musical note, isn't it?" Claire smiled. "Exactly. It's less noise, more voice." At the top, they paused. The sun beat down and the grains of sand sparkled like sugar. Delgado removed his boots and walked barefoot down the slope. His steps triggered a low, vibrating tone, familiar, strange, and deeply physical. It didn't just pass through the air. It entered the bones. Claire followed, taking careful steps. The sound grew richer, fuller, like a cello again, or perhaps a long breath through an ancient instrument. She placed a recorder into the sand and measured the frequency. around 90 hertz, almost the same as Al-Ghanima. That night, she and Delgado compared notes. Claire showed him her recordings from Morocco. He played his from California, and the two sounds, recorded oceans apart, matched in tone and rhythm, nearly identical. "It's like they're singing the same song," she said. "They're built differently," he noted. "Different sand, different shape, yet somehow the sound is nearly the same." They looked at global data. Other researchers had documented similar phenomena in China's Bedane-Jiran Desert and in parts of Namibia. In each case, the dunes produced deep musical tones when the sand moved just right. Claire stared at a map with all the singing dunes marked: Morocco, California, China, Chile, Iran, Mali. So far apart, yet united by this secret language. "What are they saying?" she whispered. Over the next week, Claire visited the lab at the research center. There they ran experiments with artificial dunes, trays of sand tilted at controlled angles. The results were mixed. Sometimes the sand produced a short tone, other times nothing. But when they used grains collected from Kelso and recreated the slope of Al-Ghanima, the trays sang, just for a moment. Claire watched, fascinated. Not just shape, not just movement. It's the grains, the speed, the air between them, all of it together. Delgado nodded. A perfect chain reaction. Billions of grains moving at just the right rhythm, like a choir. Claire smiled. And each dune sings its own song. Later, back at her hotel, she looked through her old notebook. Inside was the sketch she'd made 12 years ago in Morocco. A curve, a note, a single word, unknown. She added a line beneath it now. Not unknown, just unheard. Before she returned to Morocco, she stopped briefly in France. She gave a short talk at the university. Students asked many questions about vibration, surface tension, and acoustic patterns. But one student asked something else. "Why do you think only some deserts sing?" Claire paused, then said, "Maybe some places listen better than others." Back in Tagna, the desert was dry again. The wind was waiting. Claire unpacked her tools, now older, now worn. She walked back to Al-Ghanima with Hamid and Idris. As they climbed the slope together, the sand was silent, but she knew what waited below the surface.
It was early evening when Claire reached the top of Al-Ghanima again. The sky glowed with the soft orange light of the setting sun, and the wind was still, completely still. Not a breeze, not a shift in the air, just silence. The kind of silence that felt alive. Hamid stood beside her, his scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. Idris waited below with the recording equipment. They had been coming here every evening for days, hoping to catch the sound again, but the desert had gone quiet. "Maybe it's resting," Hamid said. Claire looked down the slope. The sand was smooth, undisturbed. Her footprints from earlier had already disappeared. The desert had erased them without sound. That night, the three of them sat around a small fire, drinking mint tea. Stars filled the sky, so many it felt like the desert itself was watching. "I keep thinking," Claire said, "that the sound is more than physics." Hamid stirred the fire with a stick. "Then what is it?" "I don't know," she said. "But it's not just noise. It feels like a moment, like something choosing to appear." Hamid nodded. "The desert chooses." The next morning brought change. Before sunrise, the air began to shift. A cool breeze swept across the dunes, steady, soft, continuous. Claire stood and faced the wind. It brushed past her like a whisper returning home. They climbed Al Ghanima again. This time, Idris went first. At the halfway point, he signaled. Claire followed. Together, they stepped carefully along the ridge. Then it happened. A single note. Low, long, clear. It came from the slope below, as if the dune had taken a deep breath and released it. The sound grew, not louder, but fuller, a perfect hum, not shaking, not sharp, just present. Claire didn't move. She felt it in her feet, in her hands, in her chest. It was not the sand alone. It was not the wind. It was everything. Grain, slope, motion, silence, memory. It was harmony. The sound faded slowly, leaving behind a kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt whole. She turned on her recorder just to be sure, but it didn't matter anymore. She had heard it again, with witnesses, with data, with understanding. And yet, she didn't feel like she had solved it. She felt like she had joined it. That afternoon, Claire and Idris packed up the equipment. Before they left, she stood one last time at the base of the dune. "Why does it sing?" she whispered. But the desert gave no answer, only the breeze. Later, as they walked back to Tagna, Hamid said something she would never forget. "The desert doesn't speak to machines. It speaks to those who listen." Claire smiled. She no longer needed a final explanation. She had the sound, the memory, the proof that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be experienced. That night, long after the fire had gone out and the wind had returned to silence, the desert sang again. Just once. Not for the microphones, not for science, but for itself.
Key vocabulary from the story. Dune, a hill or ridge of sand formed by the wind in deserts or near beaches. Example: the sound came from the side of the tallest dune. Vibration, a movement that shakes slightly and quickly, often making sound. Example: she felt a soft vibration in the sand beneath her feet. Friction, the resistance between two surfaces that rub against each other. Example: friction between the grains may be what causes the sound. Frequency, how often something happens, especially a wave or vibration in sound. Example: the singing dune produced a frequency of about 90 Hz. Surface, the top or outer layer of something. Example: the sand on the surface moved slowly in the wind. Harmony, a pleasing combination of elements, especially in sound. Example: The sand, wind, and slope worked in harmony to create the note. Phenomenon. Something unusual or interesting that can be observed. Example, singing dunes are a rare natural phenomenon. Grain. A very small piece of sand, salt, or similar material. Example, the sound depends on the size and shape of each grain. Stillness. Complete absence of movement or sound. Example, the sound ended and the stillness that followed was powerful. Whisper. A quiet, soft sound made by breath, wind, or voice. Example, the desert wind passed like a gentle whisper. Useful sentence patterns for practice. It felt like, Example, it felt like the sound came from under the ground. Not just but also Example, not just the sand, but also the air and the slope made the sound. The was but also Example, the silence was deep, but also full of meaning. Maybe it was or maybe something else. Example, maybe it was the wind, or maybe something else. We don't know why, but. Example, we don't know why the desert sings, but we know it's real. Comprehension questions. Who is Claire Rousseau, and what brought her back to the desert? What conditions caused the dune to sing? How did local traditions describe the singing sand? What did Claire discover when comparing dunes from different parts of the world? Why did Claire feel that the sound was more than just a scientific phenomenon? What role did the shape and texture of the sand grains play?